I hope you enjoyed that beautiful and very, very moving film. I mean, I know this story very well, but I have to say, even when I watched it, I think you feel like you get a very unique insight into the lives of the people who are most affected by this, and it can't fail to move anyone who watches it. And nor can the scale of the importance of this case evade any of us. This is a case of political incarceration. Is one of the gravest acts of political censorship, I think, that we currently have in this country. And so for us as a non-profit group that seeks to protect freedom of expression in this country, the fact that one of the most courageous journalists who has really worked at exposing state secrets in the UK and internationally for decades is being so cruelly persecuted by our own government and by governments that we call our friends. So thank you for coming here this evening, and I think we're about to have a really interesting insight from the panel as well. Before we go into Q&A, I was thinking on the way here, I was thinking earlier today about how I came to become interested in WikiLeaks. And I first met Julian in 2010 when he came to the Cambridge Union and gave a speech there. And this was right in the middle of some of the, in the aftermath of the really massive revelations that WikiLeaks had published. And it felt like a real moment. But I also remembered, I put together this list of supportive comments from friends and activists and some of my lecturers as like a small token of solidarity. And I thought, I wonder if I've still got that anywhere, saved like on my hard drive somewhere. And I did, and I read back through some of them, and I'm going to share some of them with you. So my senior lecturer said, Julian, nobody has done as much as you for openness and to expose corruption and unwarranted secrecy since the start of the internet revolution. I hope that the world continues to benefit from your activism and intellect in the next 39 years. He was 39 at the time. And I hope too that you have the time, space and freedom from persecution to find personal happiness. Well, I think he did find happiness, but also, of course, he has also faced enormous persecution. One of my other teachers said, WikiLeaks has democratized knowledge, thus weakening the power of the elites. That is why they are being so spiteful. We can only hope that you're treated justly. We all need your work. Another person said, you have our absolute support and admiration, and we hope that you stay strong throughout this disgraceful and corrupt affair. And I put a note in saying that what he was doing was courageous and revolutionary, and we've got your back. I don't know what that meant when I was a 20-year-old undergraduate, but the intent was there. We really, he had such an enormous, and has such an enormous amount of support. And the question I think that faces all of us now, that this film is a call to action. How will he regain his freedom? He's not only incarcerated, of course, but has, as we know, faced plots to kill him as well. The situation couldn't be more serious. So how do we pull all of our enormous support and solidarity in order to so that he can be free again, that he can be with his family who clearly love him so much. I'm going to open by asking Stella, I think, if that's okay, because I think the first question that people are going to want to know is, are there any updates on the case since the film was made?
Can you hear me? Yes, the film ends with the decision January 2021. There's some explanatory notes about some of the what's happened since. The US appealed the decision that Julian won, and they did so by moving the goalposts and making a political move, which the High Court accepted and reversed the decision. So Julian is facing extradition now. Priti Patel signed off on the extradition order on the 17th of June. Less than 2 weeks later, she was receiving Mike Pompeo, who under Trump, as CIA director, had ordered sketches and options of how to kill Julian. And Pompeo actually tweeted a congratulatory tweet to Priti Patel, thanking her for signing off on the extradition. The Wall Street Journal had a scoop, which I didn't see re-reported here anywhere. Someone in Priti Patel's home office contacted the US Embassy here and asked the US government, the Department of Justice, to make a public praise of Priti Patel for approving or for greenlighting the extradition. If Priti Patel's decision were really some kind of quasi-judicial decision, why would she need praise from the US government? Julian has lodged his request to appeal both the original district court's decision from January 2021, which contains all the original arguments about press freedom, about this being a politically motivated case, about him being pursued for a political offense, the Espionage Act. But one of the biggest developments there have been since that decision, and it's covered a little bit in the film, is this investigation by 3 investigative national security journalists in the US who have no personal sympathy for Julian, about how the CIA had a multi-pronged, comprehensive attack on WikiLeaks, the purpose of neutralizing WikiLeaks either by killing Julian or incarcerating him, and they achieved the imprisonment. And that is part of the abuse of process argument. So there are 2 legs now, against the US government and against the Home Secretary's decision. We're awaiting the High Court's decision about the grounds that it will allow to hear.
And I expect it's going to be a long process, potentially.
We're expecting the case to be over by, well, within the next 6 to 12 months, closer to 6. That's what we're expecting. This is going to go fast now because it's taken 3 years to get here. But the sense is that things are going to accelerate.
Okay. There are several questions that I could ask the panel, but I know that many of you have really interesting questions. So I will take questions from the audience and take 3 at a time. So please put your hand up if there is anything that you would like to ask. I am stunned. So we've got 1 there. Anyone else? 2. Okay, and 3. So
I can talk.
Yeah, I can hear you.
You want me to go? Can I ask a question?
Yes, please, and I can repeat it if people can't hear you.
Okay. Obviously I'm Australian, Julian is Australian, John, you're Australian, and I didn't really see anything in this film or documentary from any Australian politicians being interviewed, or was there any push from the Australian government? He is an Australian citizen. What is the legal mumble jumble? Could he not be extradited back to Australia if they could claim him? And did you guys approach the Australian government at all in doing this?
Thank you. I'm going to take the other 2, and then we'll do them all as a group. There's a question over here.
Hi. That was obviously really moving watching that, and I'm sat here wondering what we can do to help. Yeah, it'd be great to hear what people like us can do who, you know, maybe don't have ears of any or are involved in governance or anything like that, what every person can do to help. Yeah.
Thank you. And the 3rd question.
Yeah, could you just explain what you meant by the Americans changing the goalposts on the deal?
So if we start with this question about the Australian government or politicians in Australia, what kind of outreach or communications have you had?
Well, so during the hearing, 3 weeks hearing, can you hear this is working, this thing? Oh, that's better. During the 3-week hearing, back in September, August, there were 3 seats put aside for the Australian government representatives, which remained empty for the entire hearing. I received as a registered recipient of reports from the Consul General. They reported only the prosecution's points, and they never reported to me in their reports the re-examination of the defence. It was constantly like that, page after page, to the extent that one of the hearings, after the main hearing that they reported on, they had the prosecution barrister as the defence barrister, which I wrote to them and got them to correct, that they corrected it in silence. They didn't reply to my letter. We saw the United States, the Australian ambassador to the United States. He received us in Washington, and recently they received us again in Washington, but this time the second in charge, who trotted out the usual, you know, we've often account consular assistance, and it's a matter of sub judice, to which Gabriel and I blew our tops, and we tried to make his ears bleed in correcting him. The point I'm getting to is that DFAT, which has got 6,300 employees in 215 offices around the world, is the very powerful organisation that it controls the Australian Secret Intelligence Service, another secret intelligence service I can't quickly bring to mind, also the Department of Trade and Department of Foreign Affairs. It's a monster. It has been deliberately, how can I say, acquiescent to the point of complicity for 13 years, and actually continues to be so. Just a slight codicil to that, the ambassador in Washington, Arthur Sinadonis, is a decent, and the interview with him was constructive. Similarly, the DFAT constructs its correspondence so that when you put in an FOI, all of the answers fall under exclusionary clauses. So they don't have to tell you anything in their replies. The correspondence is constructed in that way. I don't know for anybody else, but I do know for Julian's case, because we've done about 512 FOIs. So they, and the politicians that represent, there's a problem for the politicians, because this is an institutional policy which the politicians are called upon to institute, making them immensely unpopular, to the extent that in a Q&A the other day in Australian ABC television, the entire audience about this size was giggling and laughing at the previous High Commissioner to London, Mr. George Brandis. His answers were again, we call them a mantra, a rehash of the ceaseless mantra of consular assistance, sub judice, even though the time, if I remember correctly, just a couple of weeks ago, it wasn't sub judice, that they just use it. Similarly, the assistant in charge in Washington, the second in charge of that embassy, used that phrase, even though at the time it was on Priti Patel's desk, so it was a political decision, and he knew that we knew that he knew. But, you know, we argued the toss backwards and forwards. But these, he was previously Australian ambassador to Russia, though he's really a trained spy, you know, and they're quite adroit at holding silence, and when they're attacked, just nodding their head, saying yes, yes, oh well, we're sorry about that, we're sorry to see you so upset, you know, that sort of thing. So that was the Australian government. Australian parliamentarians are a different kettle of fish altogether. We have started 4 years ago, just under 4 years ago, with 2 parliamentarians offering some sort of support. And after a couple of years' work, we had 31 parliamentarians regularly meeting and looking for ways to forward Julian's case and hoping, not a word that I like to use, makes a good breakfast and a bad dinner, but planning on the election that's just happened to give them a hung parliament, and they would attach to a bill the fact that they're demanding the Australian government do something about Julian's position. So that's more or less a roundabout. This new parliament, 7 members of a new party called Teal, and all of them are women, and 8 members of the Greens, making a total of 12 in the 2 houses. So 12 Greens, 8 Teal, were elected on Assange platforms, okay? Thus, they had Julian Assange in their platforms. These indicate that people are wised up, and if they want to be elected, then they put Julian Assange on their platform. Now that's not only in Australia. Mellencamp, the leader of the opposition who wanted to be Prime Minister and just missed by a hair's breadth, remains very powerful. His platform was to offer Julian Assange asylum. Just one more thing on that matter. The French Chamber of Deputies, the first parliament to do so, debated giving Julian asylum for 1 hour. Now, the motion failed, but that's not the point of this. The point is it's the first National Assembly of a major European power debating whether to give Julian Assange asylum, and that's not the high point. There's a few more things that Gabriel, STELLA and I can tell you as the question and answer session goes on.
I'll just add, in Australia, Julian enjoys, immense support. 71% of Australians agreed in the last poll. 71% of Australians agreed with the statement that the government should bring Julian back to Australia. We've screened Ithaka all around the country there. It's been on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. So there's this institutional support as well. It's not just these parliamentarians, but government institutions in the arts are all supporting the message that Julian needs to be freed. One anecdote I can tell you is that when we were at the airport, when we flew to the US, probably mid-June, and we were at the airport and people were coming up to John, recognising him, coming up to him and saying, good luck, bring him home. That's the sort of amount of popular support, and there is for Julian back in Australia, and that's reflected in the Parliament and also reflected in the current government statements, which is, the current Prime Minister has said enough is enough. He doesn't see what point there is in Julian being incarcerated. So you see the people's attitude and the people's support for Julian reflected in their elected officials in Australia.
Thank you. That's very, very encouraging to know. Before we come on to the second question, I wanted to skip to the third, which is about a question, I think a clarification. Could you clarify what you meant by Americans, that the Americans are changing the goalposts?
Well, they've changed the goalposts repeatedly. So, as an example, they've issued 3 indictments. The 3rd indictment was issued on the 28th of June, 2020. That was halfway through the extradition hearing. He started in February and continued in September, and in June they issued a new indictment. And Julian wasn't able to address the new claims in the new indictment. Those claims have since been retracted by the witness that they introduced. He said that the allegations in the indictment are false, that relied on his testimony. That's just one example of the extraordinary kind of deceit of the US government. But the US government lost originally on one point, and that was Section 91, oppression. And related to Julian's likely treatment in the United States, combined with his diagnosis being on the autism spectrum disorder, and his diagnosis of suffering from clinical depression. And the judge ruled that it was overwhelmingly likely that should he be extradited to the United States, he would be driven to take his own life, maybe even before he was extradited. And that was in the judgment. So the US loses, and what does it do? It issues what it calls assurances. And that's the letter between governments. It issued the assurances, but very tellingly, it didn't make those assurances, that letter, public. And amazingly, you had an article by a very well-respected legal commentator here saying these assurances were unprecedented and really praising the assurances. He probably hadn't read the letter, because that letter said that the US reserved the right, in those words, reserves the right to impose the conditions of special administrative measures in ADX Florence, the very conditions that the judge had ruled would drive Julian to commit suicide. So it wasn't assurances that restricted the US from acting in a way that would kill him. It was the opposite. It was a letter permitting the US to act in precisely the way that would kill him. The way it was put was, we won't put him in those conditions except if he acts in a way that justifies putting him in conditions of SAMS and ADX. And the High Court, while it accepted the letter, it also confirmed all the conclusions from the district judge, all the medical evidence saying that if he is in those conditions, that he will be driven to commit suicide. He will be driven to take his own life. So that's just quite spectacular that the High Court accepted these assurances. It was a political intervention, and the High Court allowed these allowed that political intervention, basically. And the Amnesty International said, put out several statements. Initially, when the so-called assurances were issued, they said that they were fundamentally inherently unreliable. Sorry, those were the words. And then when the High Court ruling came down, they said it was a travesty of justice. And of course, the US never published the actual wording of the letter, because anyone who can read can see that that is not what it purports to be.
So the important question that I think everyone will go away with is, what can we do? Can I go through the whole panel asking this question?
Yeah, sure.
So as I was talking about Australia before, we had that group of 31 MPs there. We were adding an MP every month or 2 months to that group, growing it. And there are also 23 courageous MPs here in the UK who are all supporting Julian's freedom. And so we're trying to grow that group of 23. So we're encouraging everyone as we tour around the country, whether Edinburgh, Glasgow, Liverpool, we're off to Bath and Bristol tomorrow or the next day. We're asking everybody to phone their MP, write to their MP, make an appointment, ask them to join that group of 23 MPs who support Julian's freedom. You can say to them, look, Amnesty International is calling for Julian's freedom because of what it means to press freedom. Why aren't you doing the same thing? I think it is so stark, this injustice now, that we have so much strength in our arguments that it's people who are not joining this group, it becomes plain on which side of which either they're for democracy or they're not, basically. So phone up your MP and ask them to join the Assange group in the UK.
What to do? The perennial question. It's that word stark is suitable because the United Kingdom starkly stands alone in Europe in this malevolent, malicious persecution of Julian Assange over 13 years. There are Assange cross-party groups in every single European parliament, every one of them. Norway has 11. Sweden even has representatives, a couple. The Bundestag passed a petition in its petition committee last week. An interesting petition because it automatically has to go to on the agenda of the United States-German Friendship Group. Now that's an agenda item, must be discussed. Amusingly, there's some witty politicians around. Obrador, he made a strong statement some months ago that Julian has got to be freed and this can't go on. Then a couple of weeks ago, he said he's meeting Biden this week. He said 3 items on meeting is the border, the number of refugees that are crossing both ways, crossing upwards into Mexico and then across into the United States, and Julian Assange. And he added that should Julian Assange be extradited to the United States, the Statue of Liberty must be packed up and sent back to France. Trolling the United States, just a real pleasure. And so, in continuing on how the stark exposure of political life within the Tory party and some parts of the Labour Party, the Council of Europe have made 2 declarations that Julian's a protected journalist. The last one, extremely strong. The High Commission of the Human Rights of the Council of Europe, Julian, has made 2 statements equal. The Austrian government, we went and popped in on the Foreign Service of the Austrian government, and some 4 weeks later they made a parallel statement to the Council of Europe. The Canton of Geneva offered Julian a humanitarian visa, which was confirmed by the Swiss Federation. The same in Italy, in the Senate in Italy. There have powerful representations, in fact, originate and drive through the Council of Europe declarations. So that's everything. Spain, there were 40 members of the Assange group last time I looked. Now this starkly exposes what is happening here to the extent, and the Geneva Convention, for item 1, really important, the code, item 1, you can't say, he told me to do it, or she told me to do it, when you commit a crime. Now the United Kingdom has its Crown Prosecuting Service, has been involved in due process irregularities, procedural irregularities, a conspiracy between the Crown Prosecuting Service and the Swedish Prosecuting Authority to keep Julian in the embassy. Not what you've read in the newspapers, but to ensure that he stays in the embassy until their timing was right. Craig Murray, on behalf of Julian, rang up the Secretary of the Ecuadorian Embassy 2 days before you saw, I can't watch it myself, before you saw Julian dragged out under circumstances that were appalling, confiscating his razor so he couldn't shave, no hair clippers so he can't cut his hair, bumping him as he walks down the hallway, stealing this, that and the other, or hiding it in another cupboard. Every single room having surveillance items of camera and recording, even the ladies' toilet, no camera in there, but a recorder under the fire extinguisher. That was his life. And then Julian wanted to leave voluntarily and go to the police station, but that simpering idiot who wrote his autobiography, praising himself for convincing President of Ecuador to rescind Julian's asylum. You can't just rescind asylum. It's a due process matter. An asylee is an official position of the conventions of asylum. You just can't, break these laws. Oh, we'll do it this way. These people are so arbitrary. Anyway, he flies over to Ecuador. You'll love this. Before he goes to the Buckingham Palace gift shop and buys the President of Ecuador a nice plate with the Queen's face to give to him. I mean, they're comedians. They break the laws and then they make the President of Ecuador look a complete fool by giving him a gift plate from the Buckingham Palace gift shop, and then make himself a complete dickhead by revealing it in his autobiography. It's a sort of like, if it wasn't that Julian is incarcerated for all these years, it would be a great comedy, just endless foolishness. Anyway, what was the point? Oh, what can we do? What can we do?
That's what we want to leave people with. So yeah, we've all got to leave with something to do to
What
help.
can we do? The great thing you can do is buy Niels Melzer's book. It's out there for sale. Niels Melzer describes in very warm and humane language every aspect of this persecution and all of the illegalities, and he stacks them up. The book is the equivalent in our epoch, the water we swim in the equivalent of, in our epoch, of Emile Zola's J'accuse about Captain Dreyfus. So that's one thing you can do. The rest, Stella's got a surprise for yourself.
I'll be quick. Definitely buy that book. Niels Melzer was, as you know, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, and he went through this journey of believing the propaganda around Julian and then actually looking and investigating, scratching the surface. And that journey in itself is very interesting, but the book is very readable and interesting. On the 8th of October, a very concrete action that you can all join. I hope you do. There's going to be a surround parliament, solidarity with Julian. And you can sign up outside. There's a table with Niels Melzer's book, also tote bags and pens and stickers. Some of those are for, you can just donate. And there's a sign-up sheet, or go to don'textraditeassange.com. There's a newsletter that you can sign up to with actions, follow Gabriel and me on Twitter. Please remain engaged. Speak to at least 2 other people, friends, and work colleagues or whatever, and engage them on this case. Ask them to come and see the film. Just make Julian a topic of discussion, because especially in this country, Julian is the elephant in the room that people don't want to talk about. And you go anywhere in the world and he is the biggest issue. And it's partly because this country is ashamed, because this is shameful. It taints the country, taints the UK. The UK justice system is corrupted by being instrumentalized in this way by a US persecutory prosecution. So talk to people, get them engaged, get them interested, bring them to the human chain, bring them to watch the film. And yeah, just stay engaged, please. Thank you.
That sounds incredibly exciting. Big Brother Watch will be there in the human chain, and I hope thank you, because everyone who's here this evening has made a decision not to look away from this case. And a lot of people who were cheerleaders... Easier.
There's also some actions that happen weekly.
Okay, so there's weekly actions. If you sign up to the newsletters, hopefully you'll get information about it. But the 8th of October sounds like a fantastic moment to bring people together, and all of you have chosen to be engaged with this, so if everyone can make a commitment to be there, and if every single one of us, even if you've done it before, can email your MP or call them again, I think that would be really important. I think every single day that Julian stays strong and survives is a revolutionary act, and every single day that his family stay strong and survive and keep supporting him is a revolutionary act, and for all of us to support them in what they're doing is going to be absolutely critical. Do you have any final words, Stella? No? Thank you. Thank you.
And look, I just want to say thank you, and you can host the film yourself with your friends, Gabriel. If you look on Ithaka.com, or there's a flyer out there, Gabriel will organise it so that you can host the film at home.
Thank you so much, Gabriel.
Yeah, I just want to, I know there's a lot of long-time supporters here tonight, so just a big thank you to you all. You all know who you are. Thank you for being there for all this time.
Thank you,
Thank
Carla.
you.
Thank you for coming.